right, I will just get started here. Um, if we might have a couple stragglers coming in here, but we'll get started and they'll kind of catch up as they come in. So welcome everyone to today's sample lecture from Dr. Nadia Delanoy. I will just start with a quick introduction of myself. So my name is Arista. I am a student recruitment ambassador here at the University of Calgary. I work with the undergraduate recruitment team. So today I'm here to answer any admissions questions that you may have. And at the end of the lecture, I'll also help direct you to the right resources if you have any additional questions with a quick 5-minute presentation for you. And today we are super excited to be joined by Nadia, who is a professor within the Werklund School of Education. And she will be doing a sample lecture for all of us on Education 420, which is Issues in Teaching and Learning. So sit back, enjoy the lecture, and imagine yourself as a future UCalgary student in her class. At the end of the presentation, I'll be doing a short admissions presentation to share more about applying to education. Now I'll pass this over for the presentation.
Thanks, Arista, and thank you all so much for taking the time at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. As she said, my name is Nadia Delanoy. I am a professor. I'm also the Director of Student Experience at the Werklund School of Education. So I work with students to help them move through their program. And I also work in the capacity of supporting students in relation to wellness and other ways in which they can engage in their program. So without ado, I'm going to share my slide deck. And I also have some interactivity. So hopefully you all have your phones or iPads or things so that you can go into the platform as soon as I move to the QR code. But I'll put it in present mode. And so as Arista said, we're going to talk about kind of the context of Educational 420, issues in teaching and learning. And specifically, we're going to look at the conditions around teaching and learning and technology and the impact it has on learning. We invite you, I think Arista opened up the opportunity for people to ask questions or put their comments in the chat. So we invite you to do that all the way through. I do want it to be interactive because that's how I would run my class. So before we get started, I'd like to do a land acknowledgement. I don't do this in the traditional way of reading out the land acknowledgement, but this picture is situated in Calgary at the Bow River. And so I want you to take a look at the picture and think about the following. Just as the roots of the trees and the plants intertwine beneath the earth, so does the histories of the Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in their connections. Acknowledging the land is the first step in strengthening these roots and growing together. I actually grew up in Southern Alberta and grew up with many different groups around us of Indigenous origin. And at one point, an elder said to me, you know, a land acknowledgement means nothing unless there's action tied to it. So today, I'd like to invite you all to ask yourselves, what's one thing you can do to listen, learn, or give back to the land and to its original caretakers? And so in my class, I would talk about land acknowledgements and invite people to think about the implications. In Education 420, called Issues in Teaching and Learning, this is honestly the anchor course that runs all the way through all of the bachelor courses in the education program. The tenets of this course really underscore the importance of learning and teaching. And I won't necessarily read the slides to you, but I welcome you to do so. And it's in a Western liberal context. So I do remind the students, because we have a very multicultural and diverse classroom, that the lens to which we look at may be Western and liberal. However, we will talk about and engage with other ways of learning and knowing and engaging with knowledge keepers from other cultures in order to understand some of these phenomena. We look at 3 different periods of time. We look at standardized education, authentic education, democratic citizenship, and systemic sustainability. I've put 2 pictures up here for you on purpose. And so I want you to just take 10 seconds to look at these pictures. They're different, of course, but I want you to look at and sort of cue into some of the things that you think could be representative of periods of time in our history and our present, And linking to learning and teaching, what are some of the ways in which these images represent different aspects of learning and teaching, or assumptions around what schooling has to do with learning? And so I'd love for you to engage with us in a Menti approach. I've given 3 ways of access here. You can join menti.com and use the code 74908949. I have a QR code up here, and I'm going to go into the Menti, but I'll give you like a 10-second wait time. Most of you have iPhones. You can just hover over the QR code and you'll go into the Mentimeter. For those of you that just want to put it in your browser and put menti.com and use the code 74908949, that would be great. Arista, would you mind putting the, actually I can do it. So I'm just going to put in the thing, menti.com, and the code is 74908949. So you can do that, and I'll just give you a couple more seconds to go into the Mentimeter. And I'm just going to stop my share and share the actual Menti so that we can work through this together. And I like to run my classes very interactively, so hence why I'm encouraging you to go into the Menti itself. So I'm going to start it by asking you, why are you considering going into education, becoming a teacher, or being an educator? And so if you go into Menti, again, in the chat has the browser and then the access code. I'd love to see what you're thinking about in terms of your motivation to become a teacher. Take your time. And all you have to do is type in your answer and hit enter. So one person responded they want to have an impact on kids. We'll just give it a minute. So someone said to become a role model in my minority community. Lovely. Another person said, I love learning. I love being able to encourage and inspire the next generation. It brings me so much joy to be around children and being a role model. I work as an EA and an outreach in high school. Wonderful. It's meaningful to work, but does not, of course. Becoming a teacher will allow me to do what I love and earn. We'll just wait one more minute here. I'm already in education and I wish to know more ways to incorporate technology in everyday practice. You may or may not get that. This will be more of a high-level conversation, but feel free to unmute and ask questions when I get into the actual technology pieces as well. Try to bring in changes in society and share knowledge. All right. So I'm just going to stop there and go back to my own presentation so we could talk about content. So as we're thinking about this, and I'm talking about the ways in which we look at teaching and learning, I'm going to introduce you to the first period of time that we talk about in Education 420. So picture the idea that you can't know your present unless you know your past, so where we came from. So we talk about standardized education. So this is the 17th and 18th century. We move in from the Dark Ages into the Industrial Revolution. There's a lot of agriculturally based technology that is being that's evolving, such as the plow, etc. And so we don't need as many people working on the farms or tilling the land. And so they're moving into the cities, and we're developing this middle class. This middle class of people and those living in the cities actually need to learn in order to contribute to the growing economy and the social structure of society. Therein lies, and this is obviously simplistic because we only have an hour, but therein lies the need for a structured, industrially framed education system. And so that's why you're going to see in the first picture, rows, students in desks, seated in a front forward sort of positioning. Teachers are at the front, and there's a prescribed way of learning. No matter what we want to consider education as, we know that there's an economic driver even into today's society. And so what we have to think about, and in this course, we talk about what describes teaching and what prescribes teaching. So describes means what is it all about? How are we going to learn? How do we work with students? But beside that description is how it actually is implemented and unfolds. And so in that gray area, there's the human condition, there's psychology, there's cognition, there's neuroscience, there's all those pieces that come into play that make teaching honestly an amazing opportunity and also makes it complex. So one person shared that they're an EA. You understand the dynamics and complexities within classrooms. And so it takes special people that understand what education is for. And so we will talk about the era of the Enlightenment. And so the idea that people are studying human bodies and kinesiology, and people are allowed to gather and talk about things outside of the biblical tenets. And then we look at areas such as how do students learn? And in that period of time, and with the ushering in of industrial classrooms, they assumed that students didn't have any previous knowledge, that they were called a blank slate or tabula rasa. And so if we make the description that students are blank slates, then how we prescribe teaching is probably going to be connected to that. So instead of me engaging with you all, if you were students in my classroom, and asking you what your lived experiences is, I'm just going to say, I'm the expert, air quotes. I don't really need you to contribute to it. I'm going to convey all my knowledge into you so that you learn. And so that prescribes a very unique learning environment for students. Think about it. Maybe they don't have as many rights. They don't get to speak up. They don't ask questions. They don't get to work with each other, etc. And so in this period of time, we talk about the conduit metaphor, where we're talking about information as being put to something in order to get something back. And we look at ways of teaching that might be drill-based. So I don't know if you all remember this because it's contemporary, but it's rooted in the industrial ways, is that you give people mad minutes, if anyone remembers that. So there's 20 math questions, they're multiplication or division or add or subtract, and you literally time all students and they quickly try to answer as fast as possible. Now, there's a time and place for rote memorization and regurgitation, typically at the foundational levels of learning. However, doing that as a prescribed method all the time, we now know results in student anxiety, challenges with those that have different ways of learning, and also implications in terms of, I certainly have a doctorate and I could be considered an air quote expert, but I have to tell you, every day I'm learning. Every day I have not arrived. And as a teacher, I will learn with my students as well. And so that's the brilliance of teaching and learning. A few people in the Mentimeter shared that they would love to mentor others. And so to mentor others means that you have to work with students in a way that helps them become more curious, enlightened, so on and so forth. And so you'll see through this era that education actually changes a little bit. And so there is a movement of knowledge acquisition. There's the introduction of empirical studies. So no longer is just the information given from biblical or church context. Information is validated through science, and I'm not here to judge any of that. I'm just sharing with you how we talk about the transitions in the standardized education era from describing to prescribing teaching and what we know about individuals. And as we do that, I want you to think about the following, and I'll go back to the Menti. I want you to think about 3 words that describes your teaching or learning experience, or you as a learner. This can be in K to 12 or post-secondary. The point of this is not filler. The point of this is when I'm talking to a class in this subject area, I really need to know where students are at in terms of their lived experience. And so I'm going to go back to the Menti. I'm going to move the slide forward, and I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. I'm going to ask you to answer the question, how do you learn? And there's a lot of science now around learning styles, characteristics, and traits. But some of the things we need to understand in this type of classroom is really, what type of learner are you? Do you listen better? Are you writing ideas down and that's how you process knowledge? Are you more of a doer? You have to create and develop. And maybe you're a combination of all those things, and that's okay. It is important for us to know ourselves in order for us to understand how we will function within the classroom. This is so important because when the pressure's on, we deliberately go back to habitual behaviors, and our habitual behaviors will be how we learn, we teach. So if we like to listen, then we will ask students a bunch of questions. If we like to be talked at, we'll talk all day and tell stories and jokes and so on and so forth. If we're doers, we'll get creative projects and ways in which students can engage. This is important, and I believe identity and awareness is something, as we go through time, you need to consider in the ways in which you approach your teaching and learning. And the next thing I will ask you to do is to think about an educational experience. And I want you to write down 3 words that define it. And these can be positive and negative. I'll share something with you while you answer this question. One of the most vivid experiences I have is in my elementary school, where I was lucky enough to go to a science-based magnet school where there were no bells, and we integrated all of our learning into projects. One of my challenging experiences was when I was in my first year university, and a teacher took a red pen and basically wrote all over my paper, so much red pen that I thought when I got it back, my heart just sunk and I thought I couldn't do anything right. I'm sharing this with you because our lived experience influences how we work with students, and we need to understand this very much so. And we also need to take the good and the bad. We don't live in a binary world per se, although most of the mechanisms are right or wrong, black or white, binary in nature. But we need to consider what does our lived experiences tell us about how we might work with students and how we might teach in classrooms. So I'll just give you another few seconds. You maybe don't want to engage in Mentimeter, and that's okay. But I will tell you that 420 is a large plenary. So I teach most of the larger plenaries at the Werklund School of Education. There are over 400 students. And so I use Mentimeter and other ways of engaging students, because you can imagine in a theater of 400 plus students, there's only so many levers I can use for engagement to mimic a smaller classroom. So love the comments, really appreciate the thoughts here. And things like engaging, that's lovely, wonderful. Creative, so your experience is really engaged with your creative side. It was impactful, hands-on. Someone said fear, stressful. And you know, we can't live in butterflies and rainbows all the time. There are students in our classes that will have lived very difficult circumstances that we can't fathom. And those students are the ones that you have to reach the most. Ideally, you've made it or will make it to university. So you were good within the standardized system. You were able to memorize, you were able to write exams, you were able to regurgitate, and you functioned well in the standard system. But some don't. And so we have to support and help them in being able to use their strengths in order to mitigate some of the challenges that they may have. So I'm going to move on to the presentation. Thank you so much for participating in this. It's not always easy. And when we don't have scale, like 400 students, it looks a little bit different on the Menti. So the next phase is authentic education. We talk about this because as science evolves, neuroscience, cognitive science, psychology, you name it, we begin to understand that students are not empty vessels. And in fact, they are rich, gregarious, so social beings that like to work together, that like to chat, that like to work with tangible items. So those of you that say you learn by doing, these are those types of students that were likely forgotten in the standardized industrial mode of learning. And so through time, we're talking about the 1800s here, and we are thinking about how do we engage students then if they don't just sit in rows and they don't just listen and memorize and take notes. And so part of that is activating learning. That means giving them an opportunity to collaborate with each other. You'll see the picture down there with a teacher working with some students, and they have some manipulatives. Those look like atoms. And you'll see from the image here that there are certain elements that are at play in an authentic and inclusive classroom. In today, more than ever, we have to think about inclusion because there's so many dynamic parts to student learning and their level of being. And we know now about anxiety. We understand about trauma. We appreciate that there are different ways of learning. We didn't know that in the past. And so with that knowledge, it's incumbent upon us to change our educational practices. And so for those of you that are sitting there and going, well, my experience was very traditional, remember that the physical space that a school is built in with rows and desks and so on also create an environment of learning. So teachers should try to change the environment within the building as much as they can. So you'll see in this era of authentic education, tables are brought in, circle tables, S tables, soft seat, beanbag chairs, you name it, into classrooms so that it actually created the conditions, if you will, to support collaboration, to allow for students to cooperate. But under all of that, the real role of a teacher, so remember this is description and prescription. The role of a teacher is to cultivate meaningful and positive relationships with students. Before, in a standardized model, it would be nice if I got to know you, but because I'm the expert and you're a blank slate, it isn't really part of the equation per se. In an authentic educational environment, it is extremely important that we work with each other and we develop those relationships, because if I don't know what makes you tick as a learner, then I'm not sure I'm going to be able to engage you and support you in your learning. In this class, I would reach out to the class and go, you know, what are the things that make you tick? How do you think students would appreciate the teaching that you would have? What methods would you have to use in an environment where students are cooperating? Because not all students like to work in groups. Not all students like to talk to each other. Not all students are confident to answer questions in a group setting. So there's all these dynamics and nuances that play out in the context of teaching and learning. So I want you to think about this in terms of, if you're in a classroom and you're becoming a teacher, how will you support students in being motivated to learn? And I have to tell all of you, I didn't share this at the beginning, but I come from K to 12. I started as a teacher, I became a coach of basketball and volleyball and track, and I moved all the way up into a director role, got my doctorate, not in education, but actually in business, and then moved into post-secondary. But with the 20 years of, or 17 to 18 years of formal K to 12 experience, I watched this issue come to play quite a lot, which is, what is motivation? I'm just going to stop there quickly, and I want you to really share, and it's up to you whether you want to share in Menti or you want to share in the chat. But I want you to think about your own selves and think about what is a motivator and how do you see yourself in the motivation space. So I've given you some prompts that you can either strongly agree or continuum to strongly disagree. I derive my motivation from inside me. I'm always curious. I discover I love to learn. Some others would say, I like competition. I like prizes. I like to be motivated by pizza parties. And I love to know that I had an honors standing in my school or my learning experience. And others, you might start with the carrot or the stickers or the pizza party, and then you naturally move to being motivated by yourself. This visualization, and thank you so much for participating, because you can imagine in a class of 400 how vivid this representation looks, because there's so many different experiences. But these prompts really need you to think about, as a teacher, what drivers are you going to use, or methods or approaches are you going to use to keep students motivated? And I have to tell you, I struggle with this with my years in education and now in post-secondary. Education, the pendulum swings always from one extreme to the other. Never does it hover in the middle for a period of time. So people will say things like, don't give pizza parties and don't give stickers and don't play games where students can win and get trophies. And others will say, you have to move towards internal motivation all the time. And I will say this to you as someone who's learning and somewhat of an expert in education, the truth is always in the gray. It's always in the middle. Sometimes you'll need to use external motivators to help students get going. And once they see that they can learn, they're excited, they have self-efficacy, they have agency in their learning, and things will look differently for them. And so again, as you go through your education career, if you remember anything from this presentation, think about the fact that how you approach teaching and learning is somewhere in the gray. Always think about the nuances and the fact that these are little and big human beings that you're working with, and consider your identity as a place marker for how you might approach the classroom. So here's the connection to technology, and I welcome everyone to put questions in the chat, because I was an educational technologist, so I'm very comfortable in this space, and my research, one of my research areas is generative AI in teaching and learning. So we're going to define technology in this context as a series of practices and devices that are available to a group of people. I'm not going to read you this, I'll just synthesize it and paraphrase it, that captures a phenomenon or an issue by putting in place something that achieves a purpose. So consider the historical underpinnings of this. So go from hand tools, so the stone with a wooden handle, to fur, so you would hunt the animals and then you notice that the hide was thick, so you turn the fur into clothing, to engines, combustible engines, to thermometers, to planes, to solar panels, to social media. All of this is considered technology, and all of this has something to play in terms of the role in which teaching and learning occurs. And so I want you to think about technology in the broadest sense in teaching and in education. We have the resurgence of AI and generative AI in education. We have VR or virtual reality. We have assistive technology. And I'll share this with you. I was on the track to become a neurosurgeon. I come from an East Indian background. It's a very honest thing for us to be doctors and lawyers and engineers. And my brother had cerebral palsy. And so the reason I went into education, to be honest with you, is he grew up at a time, he was born in the 70s, where the school system was not acclimated to supporting students with disabilities. And so I made it my goal to get into education and to make a change. So you look at those assistive technologies, there's buttons for students who are nonverbal, who can communicate using those buttons. There's wheelchairs for mobility challenges. There's other elements for speech in order to create an inclusive environment. And you'll see at the bottom the images that indicate that students can use technology. And there is quite a bit of fear right now. And I'm not saying it is not valid fear in our society, but technology is going to advance despite us. It's here to stay. And so we need to think about that our students live in a digital era. They are growing up with technology as we, and I say we, so I'll age myself, as we grew up with pencils and paper and calculators and things like that that didn't do calculations for us in the fullest sense of TI calculators these days. And so there is a change in the ways in which we can support students. And I have to tell you, for students with disabilities, I call them gifts. There are so many assistive technologies that exist. And entities like the Alberta Teachers Association have libraries where they will send you kits if you are a teacher to help you integrate certain types of assistive technology. Alberta Health has assistive technology programs for your classrooms, and then the districts have actual inclusive education coordinators who also support technology integration into the classrooms. So to be honest with you, from my lens, we've come a long way to support all students regardless of their abilities. So what about AI? This was part of the title. So AI since 2022 has literally disrupted education. We now have and understand the use of large language models through tools or software such as ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, Llama, Claude, you name it. In the writing or assistive writing sphere, we have Quillbot, Grammarly, other AI integrations, even in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, so on and so forth. We then have in the visual representation or development and design space, we have Midjourney, Canva AI, and any other AI integrations for imagery development. What this does is it changes the way students can learn, and further to that, it changes the way they can show their learning. So think about this. You all probably went to a school where essays were part of the curriculum as a final summative assessment or evaluation point. And in that essay, you were not only marked on content and the way you wrote the essay, but your spelling, your grammar, your syntax. And now with AI integration tools and specific software, you can get it to review your essays, and it helps you develop a more fine-tuned way of approaching grammar for students with second languages or language as another language approach. This helps them with the development. For non-communicative kids, this content can help them and the software can help them manifest their understanding and showing their learning. The big question is then, what do we assess? How do we mark? And what does that look like? And so I bring that to you a little bit to talk about, because 2022 was not that long ago. AI and generative AI are advancing at a rapid pace. And even in post-secondary, we're still talking about what this looks like. I offer a series twice a year, and we're offering it in the spring here, where I bring in educational technologists from Rocky View, Calgary Catholic, and we help, and it's a 5-day but 5-week series where we help pre-service teachers, which would be you, and in-service teachers, those already in schools and in the classroom, work with tools that have AI and digital affordances in it. And we look at designing assessments and designing learning so that we're integrating it into the classroom. The risk we take of ignoring it is that our students will be using it and we're missing the cue on helping them with digital literacy, with understanding how to use the tools and how to navigate the system. And so it is so important for us to really consider our perspective. And I'm not here to sell you on technology. You're your own person. All of you are adults, I would assume, or close to being adults going into university. And you have to decide that for your own. But what you also have to think about is that the Alberta government and the Ministry of Education has technology integrated into the curriculum, and we are legally bound to use it and teach it in a way that develops citizens of tomorrow. And so we have to consider what that looks like. And I'll go to the chat in a little bit here, but I just want to make sure Arista has time to do her own presentation. So here are some realities that we kind of just talked about. With large language models, students learn differently. And I will share this with you. I do a lot of research in this space and we don't have answers yet. But what we can say is this: we are at the apex of change. The AI tools are used to augment learning. So now you can type into ChatGPT and it will synthesize terabytes of data for you and give you an output of answers. It's different than Google or when Google first was in inception. We are talking about the idea that it can mimic thought. It can produce outputs that apply, synthesize, and evaluate for you. It can act as an expert. It can be your digital tutor. And so these are things that were never before seen. And in some ways, really affords students who have challenges to level up. And for students who may be successful in the traditional systems to elevate their learning as well. But what it does do for us as teachers, and I'll call you guys teachers in the making, because once you get into this program, you will be a pre-service teacher. But we have to think about then, if students can use AI, when is the best time and place for them to use it? How can we teach them how to use it by designing our lessons in a way that integrates them at certain levels? I agree with those of you who are thinking right now, well, how are they going to learn the foundational pieces that I memorized and I wrote notes on and I needed to know in order to apply? Think about domains like mathematics and science. There are certain levels to which in the calculative or formulaic mathematics or sciences where you have to know a foundational piece in order to move from A to B to C, etc. That's true. We also have to understand that the brain is developing differently for students who live in the digital era. It's mapping differently. It's developing neurons. So we have to consider what that looks like in those times and places. As I shared with you, that means that you as pre-service teachers have to consider what this looks like in terms of the assignments that you create, how you give a grade. Will you grade for grammar and spelling now? Will you grade for students brainstorming? Because now brainstorming can be done by the AI. I will share this with you in my classes. I do not ban AI. In my course outlines, they have the opportunity to use AI in specific ways, and the tasks are designed for them to use AI. For example, I have a digital visualization assignment that they do 3 times in the term. They get to write a response about standardization era, their insights, how they perceive teaching from a description to a prescription, and then they will use AI to develop a representation, a visual metaphor, if you will, or something like that, and they have to attribute it. In their reference list, they have to say, I used Midjourney or whatever it is, and this is the representation I have. They love using it because they're being taught how to use it, and I do a demonstration in class. Not all instructors can because they're not all previous educational technologists, but however, what's important is for us to teach them the skills in a very diplomatic and digital citizenship way. The other piece of this, and I'll go to the chat in a moment here, is that we also have to teach self-regulation. There are a lot of studies out there, and this is how I would talk to the class, by the way. I'm not lecturing you, I'm sharing how I would lecture in 420. If we know now that science is saying that students can't regulate well into their 20s and their 30s, so we're talking about the executive functioning, being able to make good decisions, not being whimsical in nature. If they can't do that until their 20s, well, what can we do in our classrooms to help them? And part of this is helping them understand screen time. Part of this is creating guardrails. Part of this is creating behaviors. And I like calling it socializing the learning so that you have specific reasons to use technology. I don't blame any teacher who uses technology as a gift to students when they're done their homework and they just want to game or play. It's a teacher's choice. They're a professional. Sometimes it's important for us to teach these digital awareness skills by showing students how to use technology other than a reward. And so we need to consider what that looks like. And I'm just looking at the chat to see if there's any questions I need to sort of reference here. No, there was a chat issue, I guess. Sorry about that, everyone. There was a comment about international students and the difficulty being admitted. I absolutely agree with you. But certainly that's not the scope of our conversation. Our Calgary is a diverse metropolitan city. Our classrooms are diverse, and that's a beautiful thing. I use it as leverage. As you know, you can see I'm a woman of color. I come from a very rich cultural background and with multiple languages. And so I use that in my classes to invite others from the similar backgrounds or different backgrounds to give their perspectives. And so we have to consider, how do we help students learn, and what does that look like? So in that way, as pre-service teachers, you should start learning the large language models. You should play around with ChatGPT. You should know what school districts' policies are in order for them, in order for you to understand what tools you can use. I'll tell you, in Alberta, most school districts have a list of software and tools that are vetted already, which means evaluated, and what we can use as teachers. They are very giving in those tools, and it's important for us to consider what that looks like, especially in an era of AI. So I wanted to give you this link, and I'll just stop sharing for a second and grab the link for you and put it in the chat if you want to read it later. But it is a BBC article about what students are saying in their, I'll just paste it in the chat quickly here, in their experiences with generative AI and AI in the classroom. And so let's say this was Education 420, and we're talking about inclusive education and authentic education. I would get them to read this article, and we would talk about the reasons for students loving and also being challenged by AI. So if you choose to read this article, you'll see that the students share that they actually use AI quite a lot in their learning, and they don't necessarily tell the teachers they're using AI. That's the story of the day. But what happens is when they're giving presentations or students and teachers ask questions, they actually don't know the context to which they've answered the question, because they've only used the AI to spit out an output or an answer. We have to use our ability as teachers in the classroom to help them with I guess, beneficial and constructive ways to use the AI and build it into our assignments. So I'd ask you as a class in the chat box today, share with me how we could use it in an assignment. Could we use it after they develop their ideas for brainstorming? Could we get them to create images in a picture journal that they represent in their classroom? Could we ask them to write a paragraph and get the AI to check it and show both versions of it? There are so many wonderful ways to use technology. And if you feel like it, please do put in the chat what you think could be used and how it could be used in a way that supports student learning. And so I'm cognizant of the time, because I think Arista wants 5 to some minutes as we move through it. But I wanted to share some resources with you. Of course, the course readings are we use these types of articles, we use peer-reviewed articles, we use empirical articles with quantitative studies, etc. It is the gamut. What I will say in our classes is that these types of big plenaries have a lot of readings, and so we need to consider what that looks like. And so as I've talked to you a little bit about the disruption of AI in education, but the affordances of technology and software and generative AI in education, I would love for you, we're not going to go to the Mentimeter, I would love for you to put a comment in the chat about your initial thoughts. As a student coming into Werklund in the education program, what are your thoughts about it? Is it scary? Are you excited? Do you use it already? What does that look like for you? And in my classroom of 400 students, I have usually 2 mics. I pass it around. The students would share their opinions, and we would honestly have a deep conversation about the implications of technology. And so in this way, it would be really important. And I hope to think that my students trust me. I've been teaching here for a while, And they really know that my goal is for you all to deeply think. I don't expect you to memorize everything from the course in Education 420, but I need you to consider as a teacher, what's your identity? How would you teach? What's history to the present? And what does that look like? Thank you, Elizabeth. There's a comment in the chat, technology being incorporated in research and preparing writing drafts. Absolutely. And remember, yes, sometimes there's a skill to revising your own content, but there's also a skill in critically reflecting on what did the AI actually change and why. It's a different level of revision. So I will really challenge all of you to think about this in a non-fear and more of a strengths-based way. And the technology will play out and we will figure it out as human beings and mankind as we always do. And we always end up thriving. So what? What was this all about? Well, I talked to you about two major moments, standardized education and authentic education, and the implications of history to the present. And so what we need to consider as pre-service teachers in this room, those of you coming into the education program, is what is curriculum for? You've all been in social studies and sciences and mathematics, and there's a sequence of learning that is prescribed in wherever you were. Different provinces, different countries, you name it. There's a reason for that. There's very smart people who come together to design curriculum in a way that creates building blocks for students and teachers alike. How do we support our students? Well, if we believe in authentic education, we believe in collaboration, we believe in socialization, we believe in the power of the brain. And so we need to develop conditions in our classroom. Stand by the door, greet everyone before the day starts, remember their names, be able to say one thing about them that's beyond their intellectual or academic ways. And we talk about these strategies in class. Think about students' mental health. Statistically speaking, they spend more time in the classroom with you than they actually spend with their parents over time. What does that tell you? That tells you that you are one of their main figures in their lives. And so with the power of being a teacher is the power to make or break a child. And we have to critically consider where they're at. And now with all that we know in terms of cognition, psychology, psychosocial methods, self-regulation, you name it, we need to make sure as teachers we learn as much as we can in this program, which is what this class affords, and we think about how to engage and support and protect our students. And then consider not everyone has technology. Phones are ubiquitous. When I say ubiquitous, I mean they're readily available. Most people have a phone. And that is a technology. It's very powerful. I have a consulting practice on the side, and I use my phone quite a bit for work, for Excel sheets, Google Suite, you name it. Students do the same. And so if we're not using it in the classroom, what is the message we're telling them? That they should hide it, that it's a secret, that they can't be honest about it. But really, as teachers, what we have to do is to develop digital citizens. We need to develop a mainstay practice that's healthy for them. And you as student teachers or pre-service teachers will need to consider how you create those levels within your classroom. And note, this is challenging. And teaching is not for the faint of heart. But I'll tell you this, being a teacher for my entire career, it is the most rewarding thing I've ever done, to be honest with you. And it is about mentoring, and it is about teaching content, because I'm very much a content, air quotes, expert. But it's also about the fact that I've seen my students grow up. I've seen them prosper. I've seen them be challenged. And I always in my career have kept the door open for students to connect. And now with social media, they can share where their lives are at 10, 15, 18 years from when I taught them. So it's a lovely profession, and somewhere that we certainly can invest in our students with technology and also without technology, because low tech is just as important. And so with that, I'm going to end there and give Arista time. But I hope that you can see through this exploration, we did it a bit meta, but that Education 420 looks at historical and contemporary ways of describing and prescribing teaching and learning. Through Mentimeter, you experience some of the reflective ways we would do in classrooms in order for the students, you as pre-service teachers, to stay engaged in big lectures and plenaries and in small classrooms. And also it allowed you food for thought around deep and contemporary issues that are impacting education. So thank you so much for taking the time. I look forward to seeing you. I teach across the bachelor and graduate, so I will likely see you. Please pop in and say hello if you enter the Werklund School of Education, and happy to have a conversation with you. Have a great evening. Thanks, Arista. I'm at 5-2, I think, on my watch.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Dr. Delaney. That was excellent to hear and to give a sneak peek to what students in the Werklund School of Education get to study and learn. I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. That one. Share. There we go. Perfect. We should be able to see my screen now. Sorry, went too fast. There we go. So I'm just going to do a quick presentation to share a few things about the University of Calgary more broadly and how to apply to education so that if anyone has not applied yet, they can get started right away. So we will start a bit more broadly with UCalgary at a glance, which is just some information about the University of Calgary in total. So we were founded in 1966 and have about 29,000 undergraduate students. So this really gives you an idea to how many students we have and how large our UCalgary community is. Um, our UCalgary Dinos have won 49 U Sports National Championships, so students have access to lots of excellent sporting events, intramurals, and rec sports and active living facilities, and overall a really strong and strong health and wellness centered community. UCalgary is also Canada's entrepreneurial university and a top startup creator amongst research universities. So we have the Hunters Hub for Entrepreneurial Thinking, which is a place where changemakers and innovators gather to pitch competitions and networking sessions. The Hunter Hub reflects the spirit of the city of Calgary, known for its startup ecosystems and economic growth. It's a place for our students to really start something. And then we also have a 96.3% after graduation employment rate and a 95% undergraduate retention rate. This really goes to show the quality of the student experience here on campus. Students who stay in their first year of studies will stay with us until graduation. Next, we go into admissions requirements. So these are just kind of general requirements that we have for all of our programs. They're all going to be based on 5 faculty-specific grade 12 school courses. Whatever program you are applying for is going to change those specific course requirements. Some programs do require some additional requirements like the Bachelor of Health Sciences, Fine Arts, Dance, Music, and Visual Studies. So if you're interested in any of those, they will require some supplemental pieces. And then all students, no matter what program you are applying to, must demonstrate English language proficiency. So if anyone would like some more information about that, just drop a question in the chat and I'll send you a link where you can find more details on that information. Now to go into a little bit more specifics. So these are the specific requirements for Bachelor of Education. There's a couple different pathways that you can kind of choose from to customize what you're wanting to go into. And then just to note that these slides do list the Alberta requirements. So if you're out of province or an international student, it would have to be courses that are like equivalent to these. And then you can also find these using like our admissions requirements widget on our website or looking at like our view books, which I'll give you a link to at the end as well here. That'll give you more accurate information specifically to you. So on this slide, we have early childhood education, which requires English, mathematics, one of the courses listed there, and then 2 approved courses, one of which can be an approved option. So that's kind of like your for fun classes that you do. And then the estimated competitive average as of right now is low to mid 80s. So that really does depend on the admissions year and kind of the pool of applicants you have each year. Then we're looking at the English language arts and fine arts realm. So again, you need English, 2 of the classes that I have listed there, and then 2 approved courses, one of which can also be an option. And then estimated competitive average for that would be mid to high 80s. Then the next slide, we have kind of our maths and sciences route. So the big difference here is that you would need mathematics 30-1 or equivalent, and then still requiring that English, 2 of the listed courses there, and then 1 approved course or option. And then the estimated competitive average is also mid to high 80s. And then on the right side, we have our social studies option. So this one would require social studies 30-1 or equivalent, as well as English, one of the listed courses there, and then 2 approved courses, one of which can be an approved option. And then the estimated average is also mid to high 80s for that. It is important to keep in mind that the averages I gave are estimates, as I said, and is subject to change based on the applicant pool. Again, our admissions requirements widget that's on our website is the most up to date throughout the year. We do update that pretty consistently to keep it as current as possible for incoming students and students looking at applying. So to summarize, we just look at the overall average of the 5 specific grade 12 courses required for the pathway that you are applying for. Then we have some important dates coming up for the 2025 admission cycle. As you can see, March 1st is the last day to submit an application by, with unofficial transcripts and documents due by March 15th. So that is coming up in a couple days if you haven't applied for this admission cycle yet. And are wanting to, so definitely get on that as soon as possible here. These are just really good dates to keep in mind. They're also on our website for you to see at any time, so feel free to take a picture of this slide. But these are just really good to keep in mind as you're kind of going, and can give you a good timeline for our dates you have to submit things by to get into UCalgary. Next one. So this is just our Connect with Us slide. So if you would like to speak with a regional recruiter, they're kind of your first stop to getting into UCalgary. They are region specific, so it depends on where you are living. There's going to be a recruiter like specifically for you. So that's the one QR code there. And then we also have our view books as the other QR code, as I mentioned earlier. So that you can take a look at those. And then along the side, we also have all of our social media as well. So follow us on Facebook or Instagram and our YouTube. This lecture will be posted on our YouTube for you to go back to and look at later on this week. And then we do also have a podcast, which is hosted by me right now, which we're now doing season 9. So definitely tune into that if you're interested in learning a bit more. These are all just some ways you can kind of connect with us and learn a little bit more. And then, yeah, so that's kind of the end of my little presentation. So just a nice quick one, but if anyone has any questions for me or Dr. Delaney about their sample lecture, please drop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and then we can answer them for you. I'm okay to stick around for a minute or two. We'll probably be finishing up soon here. I'll just stop sharing so I can actually see the chat. Not seeing any questions, but we can definitely hold for a minute or two if there are any that come in. The admission process is not any different for international students. The application process does differ slightly. Again, not too much. I can send you the link for how to apply. Just find the page here. It does go through steps on how to apply. The only difference would be in like the classes that we require would still be the same, but it'd just be kind of the classes that are equivalent for you. So the class name would probably be different type thing. But this is our how to apply page. So it'll take you kind of step by step through how to apply. And it has one specifically for international students. So you don't have to go searching for that or be really confused or anything like that. So for contacting admissions, I can send the link again. This is our support and contacts page. You can contact your regional recruiter for admission support as well. They'll either be able to look at your profile and accountancy everything, or be able to direct you to somebody who can and directly get you in contact with that person. But you can also find like our admissions phone number or book an appointment with admissions as well if you have questions about application that's in process right now. I'm not seeing any other questions, so unless you have anything else to add, I think we're all good to go. Awesome. Well, have a great Great night, everyone. Thanks so much for coming out.